Hello, and welcome everyone to the Schiller Institute conference, The World on the Brink for a New Treaty of Westphalia. This is our fourth and final panel of the conference entitled The Richness of the Cultures of Humanity and the Coming Golden Renaissance. Now, to set the scene for our discussion, we're going to begin with a musical offering from Ludwig van Beethoven, the second movement, Andante, of his Symphony No. 7 in A major, a performance which was given in 2023 at a 9/11 memorial concert of the Schiller Institute NYC Chorus. In the first 3 panels of this conference, we heard from many important experts and leaders, both about the very, very real danger that we stand but a hair trigger away from the unleashing of nuclear war, and also of the new anti-colonial world order which is taking shape, including the fascinating scientific questions that were discussed on the panel earlier today. It is the tension between those 2 truths, you might say, those 2 systems, which cannot coexist for much longer, which hangs over all of our heads. The big question before us is how to pull off a seeming miracle. How can we get the West, the US, the NATO countries to reverse course? Nations whose populations have merely watched year after year as we've plunged into war after war, to the devastating destruction not only of those nations which were invaded, but of ourselves. How do we reverse course before it's too late? Now, the answer to that question is to be found, in principle, in the subject matter of this panel, the realm of great art. Another way you might say that, which Lyndon LaRouche did many times, is that the answer is to think like Beethoven. Now, before we get to our first speaker, we're going to hear from Lyndon LaRouche himself, who will point us to the principle which underlies our discussion today.
What's happened is the destruction of classical culture has been an essential part of the destruction of the mental capabilities of the population. Classical culture has a very specific significance. What happens when it becomes merely entertainment without criteria, then the people lose a mooring. The key issue here is always in humanity is what we call creativity. Now, creativity is not variation. It is not innovation. Creativity respects certain principles of the mind, which only really classical cultures can convey. What we've had is people have been lost their connection or never had it to classical culture. And therefore they go out in life and they find themselves crippled by the lack of classical culture's access. That was to think creatively occurs only in classical culture. Now there's authentic classical cultures, and there are authentic classical cultures. We can trace them all the way back to the classical Greek in particular, which is fairly well known. We have other cases of that, classical culture. And they come in different sizes, so to speak, and different flavors. But they all have certain characteristics. And it's a subject in itself as to what classical culture is. It's one of my specialties, but I don't find everybody is familiar with that specialty. But this classical culture has a very specific, unique role in developing the powers of the human mind. And the lack of development of the human mind in that direction is actually an impediment to progress. It doesn't mean you're bad. It means that you have not acquired this weapon, shall we say, the weapon of progress, the present weapon of mental progress. And we have denied most people in society of familiarity with what this concept is. And therefore they're cut off from something they should have the right to know and the right to experience. If someone was given, say in music, and was given a real systemic education in what musical composition is, they would find it not difficult to begin to understand what it's all about. And they would be able to understand what's wrong with the alternative. Because when you discover that you have powers of your own mind, which you discover you were not using, and now you begin to get acquisition to those powers of the mind that you weren't using, you begin to find that you are much more important than you thought you were. And it's that role of classical culture, which is, shall we say, the beginning entry point of classical culture, when people realize that there's something there which they can't get in any other way, and it means something to them, because they understand themselves better than they did before. then they find a source of strength in that. And the first thing I'm concerned about is the sense of the inner sense of the source of strength inside the person. And classical culture, as any, for example, scientific education and so forth, these things strengthen the person inside because they have access to more power over society and society's condition than they do otherwise. In the sense, when they say, well, I am somebody, I am something, I mean something, I'm not just a thing. I got something inside me that you need to know. I've got something inside me I need to give you. And when you can say that to your audience around you, you feel strong. You feel happy the world is more yours. You don't have to excuse yourself for what you are. You don't have to make apologies for what you are. I learned something yesterday, buddy, and it's good. And that's the kind of thing I would like to convey to people who ask this question, exactly that. We have access, as probably with classical art and so forth, and science, we have the means to enable people to make breakthroughs, even on a fairly limited beginning basis, where they can appreciate what their mind is, what it represents. And once you're sure that your mind means something, then you're empowered, and you're not easily crushed. You don't have to defend, you don't have to apologize for yourself.
Our first speaker on this panel, our keynote speaker, will be Jacques Cheminade, president of Solidarité et Progrès, a former French presidential candidate, whose speech is entitled The Culture of Peace. Jacques?
A true culture of peace. We are living under a culture of war. The possibility for a third world war, a war of annihilation, of human annihilation, is becoming each morning more and more real. Looking at the failed nature of our presidents and the men next to them with their wallets containing the nuclear button make any sense human being shiver and demand peace. We have been warned and shaken during all this conference while our populations are more and more smelling the danger. Our Western governments have their mouths filled with the word democracy, but for them, the full fault of the military escalation always lies in the behavior of their opponents. Our ruling sermonizers may speak about peace, peace, but they are permanently blaming the others and involved in wars against them. It is an Orwellian world where war means peace and reality means narrative. Spectacles are organized to cheat the peoples, the obscene celebrations of the D-Day on the beaches of Normandy being only an extreme example, run without the Russians, men winners of World War II, and promoting Zelensky as a prisoned hero of the free world. Our challenge for our International Peace Coalition and the Schiller Institute is to dissipate the lies. A culture of war is always a culture of lying. And meet the challenge to build a true culture of peace. I am fully convinced that we are going to succeed. Not without going through dangerous and dark moments, like now, but to succeed because the very nature of man is to achieve a better world for the future, and today we are here, all of us, committed to that. How to proceed? We have to generate in the minds of our fellow citizens the reality principle. First, by making them sense what a nuclear war will mean. A culture of peace starts by measuring the consequences of evil. Kenneth Starr and Scott Ritter have shown us how to proceed. Face people in their minds and their stomachs with the taste of death, how ugly the face of nuclear war would be. Better to realize what the destruction of the most beautiful creations of humanity would mean, the end of the long march of human civilization. Understand how our political leaders in each of our Western countries are playing a deceitful poker game with our lives. Then show how this perverse logic works. The collapsing Western financial system needs to cover its monetary bets, to loot at random, and destroy the physical productive economies, a new form of Lebensraum. It is what the world war economy means, the illusion that the bubble of all bets could be secured by the bubble of nuclear domination, including with the threat of a first strike, like in the present American doctrine. But to only frighten people could spread a sense of self-destructive pessimism. To scare only becomes destructive if you don't bring hope. The 10 principles of Helga Sepp LaRouche convey the true character of humanity and shaken us out of the temptation of those morose delights, as the Jesuits used to say. They establish a sense of our sovereign goodness, which encompasses the dynamic power of them all to establish the basis for peace, a new paradigm towards which a new global security and development architecture should be directed, eliminating oligarchism, colonialism, and geopolitics for good. First principle: the new international security and development architecture must be a partnership of perfectly sovereign nation-states, which is based on the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence and the UN Charter. 10th principle: the basic assumption for the new paradigm is that man is fundamentally good and capable to infinitely perfect the creativity of his mind and the beauty of his soul and being the most advanced geological force in the universe, which proves that the lawfulness of the mind and that of the physical universe are in correspondence and cohesion, and that the evil result of a lack of development can therefore be overcome. These principles are key reference points, standards for a culture of peace. Our judgments on what is said and what is done to secure peace should be made from their standpoint. Xi Jinping's 3 initiatives and the principle of a one belt, one road are essential steps in this direction. A global development initiative, a global security initiative, and a global civilizational initiative make a whole to organize the common destiny of humanity for a better world to come, for a better and more beautiful world to come. In that sense, the recent declarations of Pope Francis for the new Jubilee of 2025 and peace based on justice for every nation and every human being on earth respond to what Paul VI had told us in his Encyclica Populorium Progressio. The new name of peace is development. We must add the declarations made by Vladimir Putin at the St. Petersburg summit. I have no time to quote them, but they are worth taking into consideration to dissipate the lies, the obscene lies of the Western media. His visit, despite this present moment of high international strategic tension, his visit to the house and museum of the great Russian humanist and poet Alexander Pushkin, at the city bearing now his name, and formerly called Tsarskoye Selo, testify for his principled approach, for Putin's principled approach. The potential solution for mankind, now that all of us are sitting in the same boat, are in this direction, provided that we go further, to the level of a world land bridge built for all nations. This one, as Helga Sepp LaRouche relentlessly repeats, is more powerful than the many and requires to think on the level of Jean Baudin's harmony of dissonances, and more fundamentally before him, of coincidentia oppositorum, The Coincidence of Opposites of Nicolas of Cusa. Those who refuse to think at that level, starting from the particulars and not from the one, are doomed to promote or maintain a culture of war, a culture of death. Like the infamous Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, who claimed that international law cannot exist without contingencies, because each state has their own particular will, and therefore concluding that the only method by which particular wills can be harmonized is war. An extreme way of saying? It is called geopolitics and rules-based order, and it is a culture of war of our present Western leaders. On the pretext of their responsibility to protect democracy, they impose the looting of the financial markets and rearmament to protect the looting. Let's proceed further. If good intentions are useful and necessary, they are unable to secure a true culture of peace. This is what could be called the Kantian flaw in all the efforts that well-meaning people made for peace and failed. They tried to reach peace outside the realm of a true culture of peace. Hence, the absolute importance of our common process of thinking within the International Peace Coalition and the Schiller Institute to generate a mobilization for a true culture of peace, taking the measure of the existential danger posed to humanity. A key example of this failure has been the efforts made after the fall of the Berlin Wall within the existing international organizations. They called it a culture of peace, but it was not a true one. The United Nations consideration for a culture of peace started in 1992 with adoption by UNESCO of a culture of peace program. The declaration and program for a culture of peace was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly on September 13, 1999, in the context of preparations for the International Year for the Culture of Peace. The UN Resolution A53-243 include 8 action areas which appear to be globally positive. Culture of peace through education, sustainable economic and social development, respect for all human beings, for all human rights, equality between women and men, understanding, tolerance and security, participatory communication and the free flow of information and knowledge, international peace and security. There was then the Manifesto 2000 for a Culture of Peace and Non-Violence, which is more specific, asking individuals in my daily life, in my family, my work, my community, and my region, to respect the life and dignity of each human being without discrimination and prejudice, practice active nonviolence, rejecting violence on all its forms, physical, sexual, psychological, economic, and social, in particular towards the most deprived and vulnerable, share my time and material resources in a spirit of generosity to put an end to exclusion, injustice, and political and economic oppression, and so on and so forth. A catalogue of good things that proceeded with various United Nations high-level meetings on the culture of peace. And Warul Karim Chowdhury, then Under-Secretary General and High Representative for the least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small islands developing states, kept delivering good speeches on non-violence and culture of peace as part of our daily existence, culture of peace as a process of individual, collective, and institutional transformation. Nice words, good words, but where is the flaw? Considering where we are today, threatened by nuclear extinction, such well-meaning characters did not produce what they were meaning. We have therefore to be clear to locate the flaw so as to be effective. It does not lie essentially on persons, and not even on a political regime. It lies in mindset, in an environment where the ruling powers reduce principles to mere names, as if there were bets on a stock market, a nominal cover for the true intentions. If you accept their rule of the mental game, you are doomed to fail by principle. The flow is what I call, after Lyndon LaRouche, the Kantian flow. Kant wrote in 1795 on Perpetual Peace, a book that was subsequently associated with democratic peace, commercial peace, and institutional peace. It is a sum of categories, like United Nations documents, a kind of skeleton projected on reality. Kant separates noumenon and phenomenon, the noumenon being the realm of reason and soul, not accessible to knowledge, things in themselves, and phenomenon, visible objects of perception. This chasm condemns human beings to be prisoners of the logic of a given system, more or less elaborated, with no access to reason in the world of perceptions, no access to reason to change the environment. The science of physical economy is foreign to the way of thinking because they are adapted to the categories of the world as it is. Metaphysics separated from physics. Such a mindset condemns to make good speeches within a given system with no possible effect in reality, because reality is to master change. In more crude words, to become either gifted servants, like an Henry Kissinger, or enraged and impotent anarchists, like a terrorist from Daesh, or well-fed entertainers of what our friend Ray McGovern labels the Mickey Mat, military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, media, academia, think tank. Not very useful as human beings, spreading a more or less servile and often well-fed pessimism or fake idealism. At the extreme, they can go as far as Bertrand Russell, the ugly Bertrand Russell, calling either to throw nuclear bombs on the Russian population to save the free world, or to promote a misguided ecologism to reduce the world population, with the word peace in the mouth and culture of death in the mind. Sad lives, doomed to become criminal. Us, embodying principles and on the offensive to impose them on the real world, engage in win-win economic and cultural cooperation for the advantage of the other, us we have the mandate to be reference of hope. It is our commitment to raise to the dignity of men all individuals of the human species, as was expressed by Lazare Carnot, one of the founders of the École Polytechnique and the organizer of the victory against the coalition thrown by the European oligarchy against France. In the process of our fight, like José Vega and his campaign team do, listen to Beethoven early in the morning before going to the field, and reading poems in the evening. In doing so, we ennoble our characters to accomplish our mandate not as a duty, but as a thing of joy. Listen to what Carnot, an admirer of Friedrich Schiller, tells us in the middle of his fight, himself composing poetry. Enthusiasm, love of the beautiful, sublime rise of great falls. Enthusiasm, love of the beautiful, sublime rise of great souls. We strive to reach such a level of being, and such a striving is a cultural base for a true culture of peace, to organize the political order in such a way that the true character of humanity as a creative species can be realized.
Thank you very much, Jacques. For our viewers, I'd like to welcome everyone who might have just tuned in. This is the fourth panel of the Schiller Institute conference. If you have questions for any of our panelists, you can email them to questions@schillerinstitute.org, or if you're watching on YouTube, you can leave them in the chat. Our next speaker is Harley Schlanger. Harley is the vice chairman of the board of the Schiller Institute in the United States, and the title of his presentation is "You Are the Target of Hybrid Warfare." Harley?
Thank you, Megan. Is it possible that what you think is wrong and that you think wrong? That how you think and what you believe makes you an enemy of the state? That what you assume are your own ideas, for example, that you don't want hundreds of billions of dollars going to fight unwinnable and endless wars ending up in the pockets of Ukrainian kleptocrats and US defense contractors, that has actually been implanted in your mind by that devious war criminal Vladimir Putin, and that your opposition to the slaughter of children and women in Palestine is proof that you're an anti-Semite? Well, whether you know it or not, you are the target of what is called hybrid warfare. And if it doesn't lead to the extinction of mankind in thermonuclear war, it means minimally that if you are an American, the protection of your rights and freedoms, which you believe to be enshrined in the Constitution, is being taken away. There's a name for this suppression of freedom of speech and inquiry. It's called fascism. I'm going to present a glimpse into how this works and how we've allowed this to happen. And it begins with the concept of truth. John Keats, the poet, wrote in his Ode on the Grecian Urn, "Beauty is truth, truth beauty. That is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know." In this poem, Keats investigates the relationship between truth and beauty. Beauty may be presented and preserved in art, and like truth is eternal, but what makes it so? That both beauty and truth are products of the human mind, the result of creative discovery, and both may be elusive, difficult to describe in words, but they are knowable, particularly through a uniquely human mental process of discovery that requires the use of irony and metaphor, as in Keats's use of the Grecian urn. Next slide, please. There is a different subversive view of truth, as expressed by Sir Bertrand Russell, who Lyndon LaRouche described as the most evil man in the 20th century. This is from his 1952 Impact of Science on Society. Russell wrote, "The social psychologists of the future will have a number of classes of school children on whom they will try different methods of producing an unshakable conviction that snow is black. Various results will soon be arrived at. First, that the influence of home is obstructive. Second, that not much can be done unless indoctrination begins before the age of 10. Third, that verses set to music and repeatedly intoned are very effective. Fourth, that the opinion that snow is white must be held to show a morbid taste for eccentricity. But I anticipate. It is for future scientists to make these maxims precise and discover exactly how much it costs per head to make children believe that snow is black, and how much less it would cost to make them believe it is dark gray." Russell added to that the following paragraph. "While this science will be diligently studied, it will be rigidly confined to the governing class. The populace will not be allowed to know how its convictions were generated. When this technique has been perfected, every government that has been in charge of education for a generation will be able to control its subjects securely without the need of armies or policemen." Russell was one of the creators of what some call the post-truth era. You create a narrative, for example, that snow is black, reinforce it in schools and culture, and isolate and punish those who believe otherwise. If you still believe snow is white, you must be a puppet of Vladimir Putin. Now, here's a more recent statement of this view of truth from the dystopian futurist Yuval Harari from 2018. Harari wrote, "A cursory look at history reveals that propaganda and disinformation are nothing new. In fact, humans have always lived in the age of post-truth. Homo sapiens is a post-truth species. We are the only mammals that can cooperate with numerous strangers because only we, humans, can invent fictional stories, spread them around, and convince millions of others to believe in them. As long as everyone believes in the same fictions, we all obey the same laws and can therefore cooperate effectively." He goes on to say, "The truth is, truth has never been high on the agenda of Homo sapiens. If you stick to unalloyed reality, few people will follow you. False stories have an intrinsic value over the truth when it comes to uniting people," unquote. Well, that's pessimistic, but that is the key to what is called hybrid warfare. Lyndon LaRouche described this in a June 2004 article called "What Does Culture Do?" He wrote about the creation in 1950 by the Dulles networks and the CIA in collaboration with British psychological warfare experts of the Congress for Cultural Freedom, with the goal of inducing mass insanity, what he called a dumbing down of the population, through the deliberate destruction of children's ability to engage in the process of the creative discovery of truth. This is not new, he wrote, tracing its origins back to the enemies of Plato and Greece, among the sophists and Aristotle. But today, there are more sophisticated weapons available in digital technologies and social media, which reinforce what he bluntly called brainwashing. 1 year after LaRouche wrote this, Marine General James Mattis coined the term hybrid warfare in a speech to the U.S. Naval Institute. He argued that wars, quote, "cannot be won by focusing on weapons technology," unquote. "It is now necessary," Mattis said, "to engage in information warfare. The tools of choice for warfare today must become misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation." Mattis later became NATO's Supreme Allied Commander for Transformation, then served as Secretary of Defense in the Trump administration. What he presented, the idea he presented on hybrid warfare, proliferated through numerous NATO conferences and papers. One paper, for example, presented by Stefano Marcusi at the NATO Foundation Defense College, asserted that in hybrid warfare, quote, "the battle is everywhere, often simultaneously. It erodes the distinction between combatants and non-combatants. A pervasive and manipulated media can influence the development of a conflict, as it is necessary to achieve, quote, victory in the information space." Well, this brings us to NATO's creation of a hybrid warfare operation embedded within the Zelensky government in Ukraine. Next slide, please. This is the report, a special dossier that was produced by the Executive Intelligence Review, which uses the assassination attempt against Robert Fico, the Slovakian prime minister, as a way to get at how it works. It shows that a succession of agencies were created, supposedly by the Ukrainian government and private sector, allegedly to counter the influence of Russian hybrid warfare. In reality, they were funded and run from the start by NATO, the US State Department, the CIA, and operatives in the United Kingdom, committed to weakening Russia and possibly carrying out a regime change there, as they did in Ukraine in February 2014, by running hybrid warfare against Russia. They were created to identify, these institutions were created to identify, intimidate, and silence opposition to the post-Maidan Ukrainian dictatorship, and target them for liquidation, to use their term for the operation. Next slide, please. This began with that's from the EIR special report. Let me have the next slide. This began with the creation of Stop Fake, created by Ukrainian neo-Nazis to defend the integrity of the Maidan regime change coup. To cover up the role of Nazis, the Banderites, who worked with the US State Department's Victoria Nuland, the CIA, and George Soros, to overthrow the elected government of Viktor Yanukovych. This became a model for so-called fact-checking, a pervasive instrument for censoring inconvenient truths. The Nazis who created Stop Fact said, "There are no Nazis here." Then there was something created called Mirotvorets, which published lists of enemies, which included at one point more than 4,500 journalists and activists. Some of those on the list were killed, others driven into exile. For example, one prominent Russian activist, Daria Dugina, the daughter of the Russian philosopher Alexander Dugin, was killed by a car bomb in August 2022, a car bomb set by Ukrainian operatives. Her photo on the Mirotvorets list was subsequently covered in a blood red line with the word "liquidated" on it. Further, such lists were used to justify shutting down opposition media and political parties in Ukraine, paving the way for the cancellation of the constitutionally mandated election for president, allowing Zelensky to remain in the office illegally. So much for the rules-based order. Mirotvorets was supplemented by the creation in March 2021 of the Center for Combating Disinformation, CCD, which was set up under the direction of that great Democrat Zelensky and run out of his office and his interior ministry. The CCD published a hit list in July 2022, which included numerous members of the Schiller Institute and individuals who spoke at Schiller Institute conferences. The CCD identified them as information terrorists who must be prosecuted and punished. At the top of the list was Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute, and a number of Americans who oppose U.S. support for the proxy war in Ukraine. Among them, Ray McGovern, Scott Ritter, U.S. Senator Rand Paul, U.S. Senate candidate Diane Sayre, and me. The CCD has then further been supplemented by the creation of MOLFAR OSINT, which stands for Open Source Intelligence. And the most recent version is something called TXT. Again, under the guise of defending Ukraine from hybrid warfare from Russia, these agencies are funded by Western intelligence to target those who oppose the NATO global war policy. The first Kiev International Cyber Resilience Forum of 2024 was openly funded, for example, by the US State Department. In April 2024, a CCD team visited the German Federal Security offices in Berlin, demanding action against what they called large-scale Russian disinformation campaign in Germany. Among the targets they identified was the Schiller Institute as a, quote, platform promoting Russian narratives, unquote, at a time when the German defense minister is calling for Germany to become war ready. Molfar lists as its foreign partners the Royal United Services Institute, Britain's oldest military think tank, the U.S. Agency for International Development, which engages in organizing color revolutions and regime change coups, and the European Endowment for Democracy. Its clients include major press, which run their stories regularly, such as the Times of London, Reuters, the Financial Times, The Economist, Wall Street Journal, PBS, CNN, you name it, they take these stories. Molfar defends, for example, the Nazi Azov battalion as heroes accusing anyone who refers to them as neo-Nazis as a Russian propagandist. Among the lessons promoted by these networks are: 1, everybody and every communication must be monitored. There's a bill in Congress on this principle to monitor so-called anti-Semitism on US campuses, asserting that opposition to Israel's genocide is anti-Semitism. The 6th of their lessons is punitive measures are a must. To counter disinformation, there must be efforts to, quote, to punish and deter their activities, unquote. The 10th lesson is the West should do what Ukraine is doing. Now, among the institutions demanding applications of hybrid warfare against opponents is the rabidly pro-war Atlantic Council, which is funded by US and UK government agencies and corporations of the military-industrial financial complex. Next slide, please. The Atlantic Council includes things such as the Democracy and Tech Initiative, which is involved in the OS intelligence field, supposedly promoting transparency and accountability. Next one, please. They also have the Digital Forensic Research Lab, which puts out fake stories on a regular basis. But they say this tool assesses the credibility, bias, evidence, transparency, and impact of each claim. Well, in fact, they make up the stories, and if you don't follow their stories, you're identified as an information terrorist. Then there's finally the academic side of what Ray McGovern calls the Mickey Mat, with the A in Mickey Mat standing for academic. Let me have the next slide, please. This is from Temple University. The Beasley School of Law there has become part of President Zelensky's ambitious vision. He sees the center, the CCD, becoming a virtual hub of counter disinformation strategy and resources, not just domestically, but internationally. The benefits would be widespread, global, in fact. And what you see with this is a very well-funded operation targeting every single country. So I leave you with this question. Will you stand for truth as envisioned in the moving metaphor of the poet Keats? Or will you submit to the hellish subversion of creativity demanded by the satanic Bertrand Russell? Russell's commitment to mass brainwashing was taken up by the Congress for Cultural Freedom, of which he was an honorary board member. This is a photo from their Berlin founding conference in 1950. The CCF was a forerunner of today's CCD. It was created in 1950 as an instrument of British geopolitics to bring the United States in as a military enforcer of the empire then run out of the city of London. At its founding convention, one of its initiators, Nicholas Nabokov, said, quote, "With this Congress, we must build a war organization." The US State Department provided funding for this Berlin conference in 1950, and the CIA, through its Office of Policy Coordination, under Allen Dulles' confidant, Frank Wisner, was its guiding hand. It was created to recruit writers and artists to counter, quote, Soviet peace initiatives, unquote, in the early days of the Cold War. Its Freedom Manifesto was introduced by Arthur Koestler, who declared, "Friends, freedom has seized the initiative." It was described by a Defense Department representative more accurately. General John Magruder said it was a, quote, subtle covert operation carried out on the highest intellectual level as unconventional warfare at its best. The CCF, the Congress for Cultural Freedom, was established shortly after the April 1949 creation of NATO as a parallel operation to justify the Cold War against the US World War II ally, the Soviet Union. The first head of NATO, Lord Ismay of Britain, declared the purpose of NATO is to keep the Russians out, the Americans in, and the Germans down. That remains the intent of these NATO operations to the present day, using hybrid warfare as a critical means for achieving this goal.
Thank you very much, Harley. Before we get to our next speaker, I'd like to read a greeting that was sent into our conference from Dr. Cornelia Nentz, who is a peace and cultural activist in Germany. She says, "Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants of the conference, I greet you warmly from the northeastern part of Germany. I could not have imagined the world on such a precipice 40 years ago. I am appalled by the hatred of Russia and China that is now being stirred up everywhere. We in the GDR learned the Russian language and know the great Russian culture. Every district had partnership relations with an autonomous Soviet republic. We in the district of Neubrandenburg with Karelia. The state folklore ensemble, of which I was a member, had a wonderful partner in the Kantele ensemble in Petrozavodsk. We performed together and were overwhelmed by the warmth of the Russian people at every performance. Many people here in Eastern Germany feel the same way as I do, and we wish for nothing more than peace between the peoples." Thank you, Dr. Nentz. Our next speaker, whom I'm very excited to welcome, is Sophie Tanapura. Mrs. Tanapura is a Maestra, and she is the founder of the Metropolitan Opera of Bangkok in Thailand. Welcome, Sophie.
Okay. Hello, everyone. And for many, I think we haven't seen each other for like 20 years. So I'm very happy when Mike contacted me and asked me to speak. Although I'm just going to report on very down-to-earth things that I've been doing in Thailand since I left Europe. It's really an honor and a real pleasure to be touching base with old friends again. Okay, so I will just talk about what I've been doing with music since I left Europe, and I'm still doing it still. So let me go on and say that being very passionate with classical music to the point of becoming a trained soprano, that has made all the difference in my life. And I have a lot to thank the Schiller Institute for having introduced me to not only voice teachers, such as Mexican-based Jose Briano and German alto Gertrude Pitzinger, but especially to Schiller's writings that will get us through difficult times today, such as Solana Lycurgus is definitely on the agenda, Don Carlos, and on the aesthetic education of man. These are like Bible writings that my husband and I refer to all the time. These works inspired me to share my modest knowledge and insight into the humanist outlook with others here in Thailand and in the neighboring countries. Well, how do I do that? Upon my return home to Thailand in 1985, yes, it's been that long, I founded the Ibicus Chamber Ensemble with music teachers and serious amateurs. Named Ibicus after Schiller's poem, The Cranes of Ibicus, the ensemble grew into the Ibicus Chamber Orchestra, and I was able to manage it for 8 years. I'm giving you all this history because at least that way you know what I have done, am doing, and will continue to do. I was able to manage it, as I said, for 8 years, working with European conductors and soloists such as Hans Gunther Mommer, Christoph Poppen, Lukas David, and Hans Stadelmeier. We have been performing monthly concerts over these decades in Bangkok, Chiang Mai, Pattaya, and Phuket. So occasionally I sang in smaller chamber formations, and we went on concert tours to Singapore, Cambodia, and Vietnam. In Vietnam, it was at the Opera House of Hanoi, where I sang Mozart's Exultate Jubilate under the baton of the Japanese conductor Maestro Yoshikatsu and Fukumura. That was in 1999. On another occasion, as guest of the Indian Council for Cultural Relations, I was given the opportunity to visit chamber orchestras, dance groups, as well as choruses in New Delhi, Bengaluru, and Mumbai. On that trip, I was even able to help the tenor section of a chorus move more easily and beautifully into the head tone. It was a joy for everyone. For another short period of 5 years at the turn of the millennium, the city of Bangkok provided a sizable budget for our Ibicus group to teach classical instruments and voice. At the end of that period, I had a group of young soloists, and with that group, we went on to the next step, and that was to create the Metropolitan Opera of Bangkok. We did that and performed abridged versions of Carl Maria von Weber's Der Freischütz, Johann Strauss's Die Fledermaus, Mozart's Le Nozze di Figaro, or The Marriage of Figaro, and Gluck's Orpheus and Eurydice. Doing these things in Bangkok, even though over the years things have developed more, but having done these little gems of operas, it has brought a lot of thought to the Thai society, a different point of view from what we're used to. But, you know, doing this cultural development work was not all roses. And let me share with you a story, what we ran into. There was a period when the Japan Foundation director supported our Ibicus Chamber Orchestra. One day he asked me what he could do to help before he would have to leave his post in Thailand. I said, well, you could provide orchestra instruments for the dramatic arts faculty of Thammasat University. The faculty wanted to create a music program that would eventually produce musicals one day. The shipment of instruments arrived a few months later for the establishment of an orchestra. However, a prominent member of the Privy Council asserted himself and told the dramatic arts faculty that he would now take over the orchestra project. Yes, the orchestra project was literally hijacked. Who would think that someone would feel so threatened by this cultural work of mine? There are many stories like this all along the years that I've been back here. Well, since 7 years, I have opened a French-Italian restaurant by the name of Vinifera. At this restaurant, you will be able to hear in Bangkok German Lieder, French melodies, Italian canzonetta, as well as opera arias. I've made it into an oasis of humanism in the middle of Bangkok. And even in these difficult times, we continue to provide classical music live at the restaurant. Today, at the age of 74, I still sing in concerts. And my health is still very good, so I continue to do my art. My standing Japanese pianist is amazed that I continue to make progress in my art. So I hope all of you will have the same health, energy, and joy to do whatever you love to do. I also continue to teach voice at this moment. And my recent student is a promising young 20-year-old Thai-Ukrainian tenor. Yes, you heard it right. I'm teaching a 20-year-old Thai-Ukrainian tenor. On this note, let me tell you that I'd like to ask you to join me to firmly take humanity by the hand and let's walk together towards a golden renaissance with Franz Schubert's Frühlingsglaube, belief in spring. After a very harsh winter, which we are going through right now, there will always be spring. And this is a song that I love to sing all the time. Even though it's in German, hardly anybody understands German here in Bangkok, but I will always comment on it and try to inspire people that there will be spring. So that's it for today.
Thank you very much, Sophie, for that incredible example of the power of art and your work in Bangkok. The final speaker of our panel today is Karel Vereycken, who is a painter-engraver, an art historian, and a leader in the Schiller Institute in France. His presentation is titled Cooperation for the World's Cultural Heritage, an important key for world peace. Karel?
Thanks. So, before taking up the issue of world cultural heritage and its importance for peace building, 2 words about the notions of sympathy, empathy, and compassion. 3 words constructed with the word pathos, the Greek word for suffering or affection. Today, the word empathy is often used interchangeably with the words sympathy and compassion, but they aren't really the same thing. All 3 refer to a caring response to someone else's distress, pathos. Now, sympathy is a feeling of sincere concern for and even the sharing of the feelings of someone who is experiencing something difficult or painful. Pathos. Empathy was a word coined in the early 20th century as a translation of the German word Einfühlung. It means to feel with people, not just feeling for them. When you're empathetic, you're right there with them. You're feeling it too, because you put yourself, in a sense, in the shoes of the other person. Now, compassion goes, of course, beyond empathy and means action. Compassion means it goes with altruism or a desire to act on that person's behalf. To put it simply, you relate to someone's situation and you want to help them. But empathy is particularly key to our subject here, that of peace building, because it can build a bridge, a connection between persons considering each other as enemies. We can show empathy for persons we don't consider sympathetic at all. We don't share their feelings. We even reject them. But we go beyond mere affection and engage in what is called cognitive empathy. We know and we are informed enough about the other person's background and culture to understand his true motivations. As a byproduct, empathy can help us to forgive and pardon as required by the Peace of Westphalia. Without empathy, no compassion, and without compassion, no pardon, and without pardon, no peace. So today, if we want to make peace a reality, we have to mobilize ourselves to raise the level of empathy. And empathy is the target of massive attacks. The first is a massive and brutal promotion of competition. And that's the only reason why professional sports are promoted. It's the culture of the system. Then there's the culture of the screens, which make people autistic and destroy empathy. And then we have the breakdown of person-to-person dialogue, which is the key to any transformation of knowledge and creativity. So the issue of empathy was understood right after the Second World War. For example, after France and Germany, the German and the French population slaughtered each other in a geopolitical manipulation. And there was suddenly, for example, we opened the Goethe Institute in France and the Alliance Française in Germany. The people had to learn about the others. There was also a movement of sister cities, like we heard, like the German doctor said in her message with the Russian. There were sister cities which allowed people from one village to visit a sister village in another country. They would talk, they would laugh with their prejudices and celebrate together, have interpersonal dialogue, and learn to read on the faces the emotions which stand behind the words. Now, the knowledge one can acquire of each of the other culture, the languages, the history, are of course essential tools to develop this cognitive empathy, which allows you to see other persons as products of a history, of a culture and a civilization, rather than of atomized little entities. For example, after I discovered the philosophy of Mutazilism, which was a renaissance of the Baghdad Abbasid Caliphate, my entire vision of Islam changed. I know exactly what happened to the history of Islam. I know their frustrations. I know their hopes. I know their good parts and their low parts. Today, China is currently heavily involved and mobilized to protect especially the pre-Islamic cultural heritage of Afghanistan and other countries in Central Asia. It is in its own interest. One leading Chinese archaeologist I met, which spent a lot of time in Afghanistan, he said that the beauty and the intellectual challenge of this art is the best way to fight terrorism. Not weapons and drones, but culture. It was in Afghanistan that the Silk Road players met, when the Greek culture traveled towards the east by Alexander the Great and even earlier, and when the Chinese culture and the Indian culture walked towards the west. The Buddhists that prospered in this area were very active on the maritime and terrestrial Silk Roads, reaching into Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, Xinjiang, China, East Asia. They pay huge attention to metallurgy, architecture, painting, sculpture, poetry, and literature. The first printed text known today is a Buddhist text of 868 after the death of Christ. Added to this, that in Afghanistan developed a very agapic form of Mahayana Buddhism in the region of Gandhara, which is now mainly in Pakistan, but partially in Afghanistan. Mahayana Buddhism in Gandhara, instead of pursuing a purely personal goal of the nirvana, to get enlightened as your individual objective, their objective was to bring all the other members of the human society to enlightenment and to free them from suffering. So this Buddhism became very much oriented. It became a revolutionary form of Buddhism, which wanted to free the others from suffering. Empathy, compassion, and mercy became the supreme qualities to be glorified in the art of Gandhara, especially in the form of what are called bodhisattvas, it's a metaphor for ordinary persons that are said to become enlightened, but elect instead to remain in this world, easing the suffering of all beings and helping others to attain enlightenment. Can you put up the first slide? For example, here you see, this is a later example dating from 1250 from the Song dynasty. This is a bodhisattva, let's say a female to be to simplify, and she is representing infinite compassion. Isn't this shocking? Where are the artists today which are glorifying infinite compassion? Maybe we should put out an art prize, international art prize, and give a big reward to artists trying to express something of infinite compassion. Second image. This is much older. The first one we saw is from 1250, found in China under the Song dynasty, where Gandhara art actually still was resonating. This image is much earlier from Afghanistan, from Hada. And it represents a thinking bodhisattva. So this is a man, it's not a god. It's a man which is completely committed to do the good, and who sits down and says, I have to think. That's my mission. I have to be creative. And you see these two lions, which somehow represent the stupidity of animal life as a contrast to this thinking bodhisattva, who is he's a person really committed to think and to make himself useful for humanity. So this is the type of art. It's not just that we should praise this as great art. It should really inspire us to recreate a culture of peace by creating a culture of empathy. Now, to conclude, I have to say that no one better understood this revolutionary form of Buddhism and how it could pacify the entirety of the Eurasian continent was the Indian Prime Minister Nehru. Nehru named his daughter Indira Priyadashini, which was the name known as Indira Gandhi, because Priyadarshi was the name originally adopted by the great Emperor Ashoka the Great, who lived between 304 and 232 before Christ, and who first did an horrendous war, and then completely changed his own character and became a Buddhist prince of peace. Ashoka the Great, and obviously later the Kushan dynasties, would play an important role in developing and promoting Buddhism and building the stupas and so on and so on. Now, in 1956, just before the creation of the non-aligned movement and the Bandung Conference, Nehru organized a 1-year-long celebration in India celebrating the 2,500 years of Buddhism. The aim was not to resurrect an ancient faith per se, but the aim was to claim that India had the status as the birthplace of Buddhism, which was an ancient belief advocating non-violence, pacifism, and calling to end the disgraceful caste system, which the British had worsened and which the British wanted to maintain worldwide. Contrary to Mahatma Gandhi, Nehru thought that Buddhism was a way to organize the disappearance of the caste system. Now, today, with the Ibn Sina Research and Development Center in Kabul, we of the Schiller Institute are working very hard to save the archaeological site of Mes-Agnac, which we want to have classified by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site. Mes-Agnac is the second largest copper reserve of the world. Afghanistan needs the mining activity to get revenues to, to fight opium production and to rebuild its own land. But on the top of the mine stands the ruins of a vast monastic Buddhist complex that was a key trading post for the Silk Road between the 1st and the 8th century. After our campaign and forth and back discussions between the Afghan government, the Chinese government, and the Chinese mining company, all actors agreed that the entire cultural heritage on the surface will be protected and mining will only take place with underground mining techniques. So we have won a fight, but now we have to win peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karel. So we're now going to move into our discussion period. If anyone watching would like to send in a question or a comment, you can email it to questions@schillerinstitute.org, or you can leave it in the chat on YouTube. So I'd like to bring up the whole panel. And we have some questions that have come in, but before we do, I wanted to see if anyone on the panel had anything they'd like to say in response to the presentations given today. Harley? Oh, we can't hear you, Harley.
Okay. I'd like to ask Jacques if he has some thoughts on the chaos in the French political system right now, and if that is a reflection of the educational reforms that go back to the 60s, that the situation is so fragmented, there's no sense of direction. Macron has put himself completely on the side of the war machine. We're talking about culture. Is there any form of a unified opposition or potential for unified opposition besides what you're doing? Are there other groups coming around to work with you?
Well, the history of China in the 20th and 21st century has been based on the love of the people. The French elites, since many, many years, probably since World War I in particular, despise their own people. They have not a sense of the powers that their own people potentially have. So you have this chasm, this separation between the elites and the people. And all the education, or the destruction of education after May 68 have had the same effect in the United States. You know that in the United States, drugs, LSD, were promoted as a culture of liberation to prevent the American youth to fight for justice and for Vietnam War. Gene McCarthy have stressed what happened in this moment, and also Lyndon LaRouche, what happened to destroy the ferment of justice in the young Americans. The same happened in France after May 68. So the education was no more based on the discovery of new things, on the exploration of the unknown, and to do better. It was based on formatting to be competent in the sectors which would serve the given the state of the given society. So it was no more a creative process that more or less stayed to a certain point until the 60s, but it was based on how to get the minds of the people either distorted or obedient to the rules of the game of the oligarchy. And this is what happened. So now what you have in France is this fight of all against all. You have fight among 3 or 4 political forces. You have fights among these forces, inside them, and no sense of the state, no sense of the future, no sense of the people. And this is what's happening. This is what I'm fighting against. and I am going to be candidate in the elections. Others are going to be for French in foreign countries, and we want to steer from there a ferment inside France. We have also 2 or 3 candidates in France in the elections, but these candidates in foreign countries have the mandate to bring to France a sense of where a French potential from before the period that you mentioned can be awakened and be fruitful for the world. So I'm candidate in the Far East region, Russia, China, Australia, and so on. Others are candidate in the Middle East, my wife, and Sebastian is candidate in Africa. So we think that we can bring from this exploration of what's good in the world, a renaissance of what's good in France. And I think that's the way to do it.
And then, Jacques, did you also have something you wanted to add generally in response to the presentations?
Oh, but I think it's the culture of the future is a culture of explorers. So I think I want to say that I would elaborate.
Good, very good. Okay, so let me start with a question that's posed to anyone on the panel. This comes from Anastasia, and she asks, how do you think we can apply the classical artistic composition to the current time? How do you think we can inspire new artists to take on this method at this much needed time? So who'd like to take that up? Karel?
Oh, well, Plato, in one of his dialogues, says you can't teach art, which is already a good way to provoke creativity. Is that because you can learn the techniques. There are many, even on the internet, you can find people are doing quite interesting things. But the real issue is what's the poetry behind the music? What's the poetry behind the painting? What are the metaphors? It was somehow easier in the Middle Ages when everybody had to refer to the Bible, and you would just, as a painter, give your interpretation. You're only. So now the issue is how do we recreate metaphor? How we can get people out of this kind of immediate pleasure-seeking, sensationalist quest, where people where there's no legitimacy. It's just like throwing your trips on the table, and so the whole issue is to you have to create. It can only be done by an interpersonal relations where we have inspiring examples. You can learn canons. We can get children to write canons, which they can then sing, and then from the canon you can move to the fuga, and you can do much more complex compositions. Under Carnot, when Carnot created the system of mutual education in the primary school, the basic knowledge was not only read, write, and calculate. It was read, write, calculate, sing, and learn how to draw. And this was when Carnot adopted the system of mutual education. This took like 18 months. You don't need to spend 3 years in school and then even failing. I mean, our teaching systems are terrible because we are training people not to think. We don't train them to be. We train them not to be poetic, so they can't think, and they can't. And and actually, art is becoming like a medical drug, which we will have to spread it and make it available, to bring back people to connect people to what they are really themselves, because people have this potential, but they have to work on it, and that needs a discussion. It's a social process, and that's the way to go for it.
And Sophie, I wonder if you have something to say on this as well, as someone who's worked with young people over so many years. So let's go to Sophie and then we'll go to Jacques. Oh, we can't. I think you need
Yes.
to. There you are. Okay.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes. What I would say is explore.
Actually, it is very important to learn how to sing, and you will find your strength. Because singing is like this, especially if you just learn to place your voice. I'm not saying everybody has to become an opera singer or anything, but you just place your voice. What does that mean? That means that you are able to empower yourself, use your breath, naturally get the energy out of yourself and out to other people. And if you learn to sing, you discover the potential energy that you have actually to do many creative things. And what does that mean? It actually is the combination of reason and emotion. You can't function. I mean, creativity is not just reasoning or just emotion. You have to have a very good symbiosis, if you want, of reason and emotion. And I experience this every time when I teach beginners how to sing, how to discover their voice, their own energy, their own inner identity, and the power of creation just from learning how to sing properly. And I just want to, another thing is being creative in these times of difficulty, of horror, every time you turn on the news program. So I just want to let everyone know here today that I am starting a new project. I'm actually starting a film project. I'm going to create a film, a movie. It's called The Little Lunchbox. It's too long to explain to you what it's going to be about, but you will see soon as I get the scenarios written out and the screenwriting and everything. I'll communicate it through Mike. Yes, it's a little lunchbox.
Good, thank you.
And it will have what Karel was saying about empathy, sympathy, and mercy, all these Buddhist principles. It will be in the movie as well. Thank you.
And Jacques, did you also want to respond to this question?
Yes. I think explore and you see and you feel how the universe is beautiful. You explore the space, universe. You explore other civilizations and you see what they have given, all of them, something precious to humanity. And you explore a society of creators, what in small, the world should be in big, what Sophie said, a chorus. And if you have this sense of choral thinking, classical choral singing, you have a sense of what the world would be. And you think not on a personal way, but you think like the universe is. The universe is creative. So you become creative in the sense that universe creates. And you don't stay in your cradle, but you go always in a different, what once Xi Jinping himself said, explore the unknown, and he was quoting Rabindranath Tagore. So you have this sense of you become bigger because you are with other people that fought for truth, justice, and beauty. And then you can change the universe because you are not pessimistic, you become optimistic because you see that the best of all human beings had given to humanity. And then also I would strongly recommend to read Leibniz to read Vernadsky and to read Larousse. And then you would have a sense how if you read Larousse, immediately you would fight for his exoneration because you see everything that humanity deserves to know without prejudice. And then you have evolved in a fight for you become a true human being in a world where humanity is targeted for destruction, not only physical destruction, but mental destruction. So it is a personal commitment at a certain moment. It may seem at the beginning something heavy, but it becomes lighter and lighter, and duty disappears, and it becomes a commitment, a joyful commitment, and you feel that people around you change, not only yourself, but people around it and the idea you have of them.
And Harley, did you want to say something also?
Yes, just 2 points quickly. One of the things that Helga has always emphasized is the importance of adopting a country, learn something about another country. Because one of the problems that we have is on the one hand, you have the World Wide Web, people are traveling more, but they're carrying with them certain prejudices, and they're not even aware of them. And this idea of actually studying the great thinkers of other cultures and the history gives you an opportunity to break free of these kinds of prejudices. Now, at the same time, I think the other thing that we should come back to is this idea of irony. And, there's the most profound irony right now is that we're facing this grave danger to humanity. And most people in the United States know something about it, but not much. But it doesn't seem to bother them. And I think if you think about the irony of a Secretary of State, Blinken, who tours the world talking about how sad he is when he sees what's happening to children in Palestine. And then you find out the reality is that he's so sad, but he's still providing the weapons to Israel to destroy the children. Or that Blinken, when he talks about the suffering of children, defends the sanctions policies that are starving children and denying them medicine, whether it's Syria, Yemen, or something else. Get people to start thinking about these ironies. Do they accept these ideas? Or, the other one, that I covered in my presentation, the idea that you have to brainwash the people of this country because Russia is engaging in hybrid warfare. Well, ask the question, what are they doing? What is it that they're doing? Very few people realize that one of the big lies behind the Ukraine proxy war is the idea that Russia's invasion was unprovoked. It's very simple to show that that's not true. So to get people to think about the ironies, not just lies, but the fact that what people are being forced to believe goes against the actual principles and qualities of human nature and the idea that we ultimately are one human race. So that's what I wanted to say.
Good. So we have a follow-up question that was sent in from Philip. He says, there has been an emergence over recent decades of a growing rejection of modernism and for at least the formal directions of classical art. Oh, I'm sorry, he says, against modernism and for at least the formal directions of classical art, painting atelier, traditional architecture, a return to film-based photography beyond just the novelty fad among younger people, a concern that ballet has become just a sport, and so forth. How do the panelists envision avenues for a king's new clothes exposure of modernism and a return to the true basis of what classical truly means? Who would like to take that up? Karel?
Yeah, this is a long story because when I came out of my training program, I was a modern, so-called modern artist. Well, if I now go to a gallery and show a figurative painting, they say, well, you're already dead. You're not a modern artist. You're not a contemporary artist. Now, so I spent quite some time to find out what's the real story behind this, and the key concept, which is the opposition between a symbol and a metaphor. Because the basis of modern art, actually there was a real disease with Romanticism. Romanticism created the whole period and a fashion in vogue of what was called symbolism, where the issue, now symbolism and metaphor both say that there is something behind the perception of your vision. The symbol says, this is like a secret key. If you have the secret key, you can open the gate and you know what the meaning, the hidden meaning is behind. Now, metaphor is different because metaphor will put analogies, will put things together in a sense to create a paradox, which every person looking to the painting actually can overcome. And without somebody giving him the keys, he can discover by his own discovery the so-called hidden message or the implied message by the pun, by the joke made by the artist, which is can use then the joke or for example, in Piero da Francesco, it will be a geometrical joke. It will be a geometrical paradox to bring in, for example, a notion of a higher realm of spirit, of a spiritual meaning. So the modern, abstract art and modern art and contemporary art is nothing of the most degenerate form, metastasis of symbolism. And people go to modern art museums and they say, it's wonderful, but I don't understand anything. Probably because I'm too stupid. So the thing is, once people realize that this is, there can be key codes, you should know that this is this and that. You can read Kandinsky and Klee, and they explain you some of the codes, that red means this and black means that, and a circle means this, and so on and so on. But that is symbolism. You have to grasp the symbol. And symbolism is the language of the oligarchy, of the secret services. That's the way they communicate, by symbols. Metaphor is essentially a Republican humanist methods of uplifting the mind by creating a paradox which stimulates our mind and helps us create and discover in our mind what we are seeing in the painting, in the music, in the sculpture. And that's a science. That's a science, and we can train people. We have to make people alert on this. And the issue is not the form. It's not an issue of being figurative or not figurative as such. The issue is what's the method behind. And we really have to propose the method of metaphorical thinking in poetry, music, painting, and then we create a communication among human beings and bring back the dignity of the human species.
Good. I'll just add, Karel, that Johannes Kepler took up the exact same issue in his work, The Harmony of the Worlds, and his attack on the Rosicrucians and the others who took numbers and geometry as a symbolic oligarchical key for the elites, as opposed to what Kepler unfolds, which is that the action in the mind of figuring out the paradoxes, the generating principles that create the paradoxes and the visible geometry, that's the key. And that's what allowed him to make his great discoveries. Okay, so we have a question that was sent in from Dennis Speed, who says, it would be nearly a crime against humanity to have both Karel and Jacques on this panel on classical culture and not reference and tell many people for the first time about the great François Rabelais and his secret weapon to destroy all oligarchies, especially when confronted with the clowns of the G7 and the mummy called the President of the United States. please reveal something to the audience about this secret weapon? So I'll direct that to you, Jacques.
Well, François Rabelais led the fight for classical humanism, including inside the church. What he in the most popular language manages to spread the highest conceptions about human beings. They call that evangelical Catholicism, which means that it's not accepting the rules of the game of a given form of knowledge, but always discovering new territories. In the fourth book of his writings, it is an expedition where people tries to find the divine bottle. So it's a mockery about bottle, wine, divine, etc. He plays with words all the time, like Lin would do. So he has this crew of people in a boat. So there is the ones that pray and ask for mercy and whatever when there is a tempest. Tempest was a rector in the University of Paris that was a horrible individual that Rabelais attacks. So there is this tempest, and people like Pantagruel, who is a figure, said, "Oh, we are lost. Let's pray God. Let's pray God." Then there are others that say, "Let's fight and let's do what we think with our methods." And then the hero, which is Pantagruel, it's not Panurge. I was thinking Panurge before. Pantagruel takes the lead and organizes a crew. And I would say he organized the crew as a chorus for salvation, and he succeeds. So Rabelais gives a sense of how there should be a higher sense of unity in the population through this. There is also lessons on how you have to be educated, what happens if you are miseducated, if you try like Panurge. So Rabelais has been attacked from all sides. He has been said to be vulgar. He has been said to be so funny. He has been said to be a person that was bad educated and so on and so forth. But in fact, the truth is that he likes the people and he loves the people and he does for the people. He tries to convey the best that he himself is able to conceive. So that's in the history of France, faces on the other side those who have destroyed the language, the culture of the court. The culture of the court, later adopted by the bourgeoisie, is a culture of good manners, spezzatura. You behave well, you know what to say, you say it at the right moment, and little by little you destroy the language. It becomes a language which is in part dead because it's like Kant. It's dead, it's form of categories, it's form of good sentences, and it's based not on the creation through a mastering of ambiguity, but it's based on formalism and, in that sense, conceptualism, which is a fake word, a good word to do a fake thing, which means reduce to the vocabulary of court and justice the language. And we have been trying to revive the language as a political issue. And there are attempts here and there, but I think it's a key challenge for us. And it's a key challenge for the history of France. Lin enjoyed Rabelais, Lin de la Roche enjoyed Rabelais all the time. He made the funniest jokes following Rabelais and following, let's say, experimenting them, including in American history.
Very good. All right, so we have a question that was sent in by Hans, who asks, are the religious streams in the world a part of the solution or a part of the problem? And he clarifies that by religious, he doesn't mean cultures or spirituality generally. So maybe I'll throw that out to Harley first, and then anyone else who wants to say something.
Well, this is an interesting question because you can see that religion is one of the areas that's been targeted by the geopolitical outlook of the British Empire. You know, the idea that the disagreements between religions offer an excuse for identity conflicts, wars, and so on. And so on the one side, you have to look at what is it that's in religion that provides the basis for that. And you know, this is where you see many of the brainwashers, like those people who have studied how you manipulate people, study religion and the creation of cults. And they take out of the religion the more important aspects of it, that is, what is common among all people. For example, the idea of the Peace of Westphalia has within it the benefit of the other, that your policy should be based on acting for the benefit of the other. Now, that exists, as far as I know, in almost all religions. In Christianity, it's the golden rule. You know, the idea that you don't just try to take care of yourself, but you have to have this purpose of protecting and acting in the interests of other people. But then you see, I mean, well, just to take the situation in the Middle East right now, in Southwest Asia, if you really know something about religion, you know that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all start from the same basic idea of one God and the responsibility of people to act as an instrument of that one God. So why do you have these wars? Why do you have the ability to manipulate them against each other? Well, then you realize it's not just the religion, it goes outside of the religion. And this is where you see the ability to corrupt people, which is what's used. So for example, in terms of the fight right now in the Middle East, people say it's Muslims versus Jews. It's actually real estate speculators acting on behalf of globalist bankers who are trying to grab land and refuse to recognize that there's a justice principle here, that the Palestinians are being denied land. In a sense, it's a religious question. It's a violation of the great religious principles of acting for the interest of the other. But it's because the religion is more or less a series of beliefs and cult-like aspects, like the Zionism is, in a sense, I would argue, and have argued, that it is a cult that was created by the British establishment to use the Jewish people as an instrument of British imperial policy. Well, the same thing is true of what's being done to the Ukrainian people right now. It's not a religious thing, but it's the same kind of thing. You create an idea which doesn't really exist, which is fighting for democracy and freedom. Where's the democracy and freedom in Ukraine? So we're coming back again to irony and metaphor. So I think the problem is very few people really understand what the principles of religion actually are. And I think that's a place to start, to look at things such as the Popularum Progressio. I think Jacques may have mentioned that in his presentation. What Paul VI said, development is the name of peace. That if you are truly a God-fearing individual, then you should be committed to that kind of development, which improves the circumstances of life for everyone. And if not, what kind of Christian are you, or Jew are you, or Muslim are you, or Hindu are you, if you're only interested in your own type? So I think, you know, the problem here is you could say, well, people have to get back to the original religion. No, it's people have to stop being manipulated and stop allowing things that are not based on religious principle at all. And you hide behind religion when in reality there's something else going on. And I think this is one of the biggest problems we have in politics right now, the so-called identity politics. Divide people up based on the smallest personal interests and define them as something more universal when they're not universal. So religion does start with universal ideas, and that's the problem when you reduce it to a set of beliefs that make things unknowable outside of the potential of human capacity. I know that doesn't answer the question, but I think that's where the problem is.
Okay, we have a question that's come in for Sophie. Sophie, what would you want to tell the Europeans about how they should think and act? You'd lived in Europe, and now all these years later, what advice would you give?
Well, actually, yes, I was actually appalled by this whole European reaction against Russia, because it's totally against the interest of the European countries to follow the sanctions policies of the United States. And for the life of me, each time these things were announced, you have to cut ties with Russia and all that, when historically there's been a lot of very constructive and cooperative ties between Eastern and Western Europe. And I actually don't understand. I mean, with all the philosophies and all the good, beautiful, and deep thoughts that run through European literature, European thinking, and that how can they capitulate to such obvious things like, I mean, why not buy Russian gas? What's the problem? Simple things like that. Sense of survival. What happened to that? And the leaders I could understand. If they follow the United States, they're part of an elite which is corrupt and so I understand that. But the people, it took them so long, the citizens of Europe, so long to finally manifest in some way or the other. What, since Russia launched its special military operations, it's only, 1 year later, you see them move in the streets, finally? It was long. It was long. I don't know what happened to Europe. Maybe Jacques and Karel can say something there.
Go ahead, Karel. I'm trying to find something. Or Sophie. Yes.
Well, it's true and untrue. The thing is, this is the kingdom of sophists. They will, they can talk so good, that they can sell. They put a piece of shit in your hamburger and put salad on it, and people buy it because it looks green, the salad. So the thing is, there is a reaction. Part of the European, if you read the European response in European elections, it's in a very confused way. The people are getting very angry. Their lives are being destroyed. In 2017, we put this on the table. The shift was towards the working poor. People are working like hell. They get 2 jobs. They are kicked out of their homes. So the schools are destroyed. Their children come back home. They don't remember if they went there as a girl or a boy. They don't know what form they took during the training. It's the hospitals are closed. There's a region in the Morbihan in France, in Brittany. They called in the Cuban embassy and they said, can Cuba send some medical doctors to Bretagne, to France? Because Paris is not sending us doctors anymore. We want healthcare. We need it. So people are very angry. And either they say, well, this is all the fault of the immigrants. This is the fault of the leadership. This leadership is complete crap. anybody who is hated by the government, we will vote for them, and find a way. It's very confused. So there's a big, and it's like the last days remember me the French Revolution. There is every day there's a new party being created. A day later it's being it blows up in different pieces. The next day one get in jail. The other day it's discovered that the man who we thought was from the left in reality is from the far right, and it's it's a grand guignol. It's grand guignol. It's a real shame, because there is so much real creativity. If you look to what has been done on fusion power in France, the capacities we have in the domain of nuclear energy, in the medical sector, there's huge potential in Europe, in France, and Germany, and this is being trampled. It's being destroyed by all these les chapeaux à plumes, the hats with feathers, the marquis. What Jacques said, the enemies of Rabelais, the court, the pimps, the pimps are running the show, and that's our problem. So we are trying what we can to get the most valuable people of all sides, from the communists to the Gaullists, to the trade unions, to the professionals, to get them together and to form something and rise up and say, no, this should stop. We have to go for peace. We have to go to work with the global South, which is now, in any case, the world. The world is not anymore Europe or the United States. And we want to survive. And you should join. If you want to survive, join us.
Jacques?
I should tell Sophie that I'm very happy to see her here. We have spent many days and days and days fighting together in France. Now she can make a groundswell to revitalize France. I am candidate for the French in foreign countries, and part of my circumscription is Thailand. So speak to every Frenchman in Thailand to vote for me, not as a person, but to vote for me as a certain idea of France, as de Gaulle would say, and that we should cause a shift in the thinking. If I reappear after the 3 presidential elections, they think that they have thrown me out of the system, and now I would reappear as something that they won't expect. So there are 13,000 Frenchmen in Thailand. There are more in China, but Thailand, there are many, many Frenchmen. So that's one thing. The other thing is that I think always in all countries, there is something deeply ingrained which is good. And I am very confident that this thing, when there is evil, as Leibniz said, a better good can surge. So you need people to fight for it. We are all fighting for it. And I think on that, I am optimistic, because I think that pessimism, I am not a blind optimist, but I am optimistic because I am committed and to do the better good. And I think that today we have an opportunity, because from evil can come a much better good.
All right. Well, I actually have a question. Oh, go ahead.
It is some kind of irony that de Gaulle went to London, Cheminade went to China, to organize the resistance from abroad. So that's a good image we can use to shake up the country.
So I actually have a question, which is for Harley, but anyone's welcome to jump in. And Harley, you quoted John Keats near the beginning of your presentation, that beauty is truth and truth beauty. And you asserted that both are knowable, which is not the way most people think today. So I think that's a very controversial statement. I wondered if you could elaborate, and of course anyone else is welcome to jump in.
Well, it was meant to be paradoxical. Because on the one hand, what people think is truth today, we may discover is not true. If you think about the example you gave of Kepler, we have all these examples in science, things that we thought were true and were taught as truth, turned out not to be true. But what is true? The human creativity can always discover the higher truth, that we can always find out we were wrong, and that there's a higher truth that we have to search for. Now, beauty is a little more difficult because there's the saying, "Beauty's in the eye of the beholder," and I think Karel could refute that very eloquently. That there are principles of artistic creativity which reflect this beauty especially of human creativity, especially in painting. You can look at some of the paintings of Rembrandt and you see the characters that are the subject of the drawing may not be beautiful from the standpoint of a Hollywood beauty, but Rembrandt saw the inner beauty in that person, and it comes out in the painting, unless you're dominated by Hollywood. So I meant it to be somewhat paradoxical because the real point there is that what beauty and truth have in common is they're subjects for exploration of the human mind. And that's what we do know on Earth, that we can always look for those higher qualities and principles around which we can organize our society. And that's what Keats was talking about. The idea of the heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. I'm probably not quoting it exactly right, but he's saying something about the difference between a physical reality and what you might call a spiritual reality that reflects the actual nature of man and the human soul. So I think that's the point. Now, what is Russell's point? Russell's point is that we're going to tell you what's true and you're going to learn to like it. And if you don't, we can use punishment, we can use isolation. We have many, many ways of getting you to see things our way. But that's how, the Russell idea is, the post-truth idea is that you can't know anything that's true. It's all subjective. It's all in the individual. And that's not true. What is true is that we do have a capacity to move closer and closer to understanding the physical processes which shape our world. And that's what should be the subject of education and human activity and collaboration between nations. And since we were talking about culture in this panel, that's the other point, that what some cultures think is unacceptable that they see in other cultures, maybe if you actually learn something about that other culture, you'd realize that there's a reason for it. So anyway, I was trying to provoke a paradox. I'm glad I did provoke you on that one, Megan.
All right. So we have, I was going to say one more question, two more questions, but the one, I think it's already been answered. So I'll read this question. If there's anything more to say, I welcome it. And then I'll read the other question. So this question is from Beatrice. She says, how can we analyze the behavior of the French people and even that of the Europeans who do not react to what's happening? Rising prices, the pandemic, looming world war, the madness of governments. When we are millions against the few. The proverb says, he who says nothing consents. What should we think of that? They moan, but they don't move. So that's one question. I think it's been partly addressed, but if there's more to say, of course, you're welcome. And then the other one I think is specific to Harley, and Harley, I'll let you decide how to answer this. This is a question from YouTube that came in during your presentation on the Mirat and Stop Fake and so forth. What is the significance of Zelensky's so-called peace conference in Switzerland without the presence of Russia? Why did China decide not to attend?
You want me to start with that one?
Sure, you could start with that. Mhm.
All right. Well, this is an example of a classic fraud. You know, if Zelensky wanted peace, he could have had it in March and April 2022. Zelensky's not a president. He's an actor. He's a placeholder who's a functionary on behalf of the interests behind NATO and the military industrial financial complex. And he's perfectly happy, I think, to continue the war. And ironically, the same way that Netanyahu is happy to continue the war. Because when the war ends, as it has to at some point, because Ukraine is being drained of people and resources and exhausted, at that point, Zelensky's going to be out. Meanwhile, he's the darling of the Western media. Why? What has he done that makes him the darling? He's willing to sacrifice the people of Ukraine for his own standing. And this, by the way, just to go back to what I was talking about in terms of the targeting by the CCD and Metropolitan and others, the specific charge against me as an information terrorist is that I said that the Ukrainian people are dying on behalf of NATO, and they're being used by NATO for the NATO goal of weakening Russia. Well, that's absolutely the case. So what was it that Zelensky was trying to do with this meeting? Well, what's clear is that most of the world, the so-called global majority, is not supporting the US, UK, NATO position of arming Ukraine to weaken Russia. There have been many indications of that. But the attempt to get a peace agreement which says it's all Russia's fault, it was unprovoked, this is the narrative. And Zelensky's peace conference, so-called in Switzerland, was designed to support this narrative, that Russia's actions were unprovoked, they're a violation of law, and so on. And what I find disappointing is that, given that it appears that China did decide to not go to the meeting, to boycott the meeting, they could have raised some of these issues, like the fact that the legitimate security concerns raised by Putin long before February 2022, when the special military operation was launched, namely the eastward expansion of NATO, the attacks on the people in the eastern Ukraine. None of these issues were taken up by the West. None. They wouldn't even negotiate. And so now they're saying, wiping all that out, that real history, they're saying, well, it's Russia's fault. And Zelensky's peace conference basically says Russia has to admit it was wrong, has to give back all the territory, including Crimea, and nothing would be done to address the legitimate security concerns of the Russians. So I think this is a perfect example of how narratives are used to try to shape a reality, but it's all based on delusion, because the reality is that Ukraine can't win a war. But at this point, the intention is not to have Ukraine win, but to find victory as provoking a regime change in Russia, or just simply as Defense Secretary Austin, the Defense Secretary from Raytheon, as he said, our goal is to weaken Russia. So someone in the international community, maybe China, maybe Brazil, someone has to raise the point that this whole thing was a fraud, and a fraud designed to fit a narrative of permanent warfare.
Okay. So we don't have any more questions at the moment. So I think what we'll do now is go in a moment to any concluding remarks that our panelists... Oh, Jacques, yes.
Yes, before that, may I add a point on Kant, on Immanuel Kant? It's very important to understand, because many people are, let's say, dominated by a wrong way to face the challenge of history. Usually, concerning the conceptions of relations of human beings, Hobbes is opposed to Kant. So Hobbes is in favor of a Leviathan, a strong power, a strong authority to secure order, because order is what needed with human beings that cannot understand another way of ruling if it is not to overcome anarchy. Kant instead says that perpetual peace is necessary, and he proposes a lot of things, a lot of let's say a catalog of imperatives to moderate the conflicts and to reduce the conflicts. So what they have in common, Hobbes and Kant? A pessimistic view of human beings. They think that human beings are evil, and you have either to dominate or to control them with tricks. So in fact, if you fall into the ideology of Kant and the conception of Kant, you have, in fact, behind your so-called generous ideas or conceptions and all you speak, or you have a dirty mind. And let's see what Kant says, and I think it's key to have these quotes. He says in his Physical Geography in 1802, humanity in its highest perfection is located in the race of the whites. The blood from the blacks is loaded with phlogistics, which explains why their smell is strong. So you have a blatant racist. When he speaks about what he really thinks, that's what comes out. So I think people should clean their act in general when they fight for the right cause and see through the civilizations, through everything that human beings have given to their fellows, to see what would inspire them to do the good and not to be in the position of the lesser of the evils, or in a position to try to mediate instead of inspire.
Thank you, Jacques. All right, so in a moment, we'll move to closing remarks. Before that, I want to take up something that Jacques said a little while back, which is read LaRouche. Read LaRouche. It's all there. The most important ideas that you need, that we need to overcome what's actually stopping the populations from rising to the historic moment and acting to create something entirely new for humanity. It's in the writings of LaRouche. So what I wanted to show is that we've just published the second volume of Lyndon LaRouche's collected works. And this is available on the website larouchelegacyfoundation.org. This second volume includes 17 of Lyndon LaRouche's most important writings on the topic of classical artistic composition, including larger works, never before published memos, internal documents, papers such as Beethoven as a Physical Scientist. And I think if the title of that doesn't provoke you to read it, I'm not sure what would. But so I want to announce that that's available for purchase on the LaRouche Legacy website. And I would urge everybody to pick up a copy as one of the main items in your arsenal for being a potent organizer at this moment of history. So with that, why don't we go to closing remarks and comments that the panelists would like to make. We'll start with Karel.
Okay, I would also say read LaRouche, but especially be as funny as he was. Be like LaRouche, which is, you don't be nice, but be a lovely person, but be very demanding. Don't talk to people. Try to meet them. Try to find out why they're doing what they're doing. Talking to people is useless if you don't try to meet them. And you have to show your emotions. There's a big market. There's a big demand. People are trying to find human beings. So don't miss disappointment with humanity. People are waiting for us because they are fed up of this brutal uncivilized world. They're lacking beauty. They're looking for beauty, reason, and to find a way to do the good things and do what has to be done. So don't be nice, be lovely, and be funny, because without joy and fun, we will not survive.
Sophie.
Okay, well, I would say if there's any fear that is keeping anyone from doing the right thing, any little bit of fear, well, just think of it this way. If you don't do it, we have reached the end. If you act, there's a chance. What can you lose if you want to say the truth? What can you lose? Because if you don't say it, you're lost. You lose and you're lost. Anyway, right?
Thank you, Sophie. Harley?
I want to pick up on what Jacques said about Rabelais and the importance of this kind of approach in classical culture to give the people of France and then beyond France an understanding of the actual historical development that their civilization represents. And I'll take an English dramatist, Shakespeare, who loved to poke at the so-called heroes, and more importantly, the hero worship in the population at his time. And I'm thinking in this case about the play Henry V, which was taken as a model for the George Bush sole superpower, the courageous and wise Henry doing a pep talk to the troops before the Battle of Agincourt. We few, we precious few. The idea of inspiring people on the basis of a national victory against the French, and the fact that the Bush neocons thought this was a great example for Bush, because like Bush, Henry was a degenerate as a young man. He didn't take seriously his role, and he was unprepared to be the king. And then he's the king, and then he becomes a great war hero. And they use that as a metaphor for Bush. Now, obviously, they didn't read the series of plays, the Shakespeare plays on the Plantagenets, because first of all, the truth is there in the opening scene, where the religious leaders are talking about having a war so Henry won't tax them. So Shakespeare puts right out in the front that Henry's not his own man. He's controlled by this oligarchy, which included the church people. But then if you get to the end of the play thinking, well, he still became a great hero, the next play, Henry VI, opens with the fact that they lost France. All the sacrifices to win France were for nothing. Henry's dead. His son is, I think, 6 months old. And the same oligarchy is now controlling the kingdom again. So for Shakespeare's audience, this was a way of giving them a sense of the real tragedy of the Plantagenets. And the tragedy is that as long as you have an oligarchy ruling a country, it's susceptible to manipulation, susceptible to the kind of hero worship, which usually turns out to be unworthy. And so I think the other thing I would say on this is that Shakespeare, like Rabelais, like Cervantes, like Dante, developed a language that was rich with the capacity for metaphor. And that's why this kind of culture is so important. And that's why one of the reasons Lyndon LaRouche emphasizes so much this principle of classical culture as opposed to the reductionism that you see in science and language generally. So take up the great artists, the painters, the composers, and the playwrights, and of course Schiller and his circle around him, including including the whole Mendelssohn crowd, Lessing and others. They did the same thing with language. And now if you look at the language, the ability to communicate of the younger generation, because of social media, because of the culture that was created by the Congress for Cultural Freedom, people have a difficult time communicating powerful ideas. And so what I would just finish by saying this, it was inspiring to see young people on the college campuses out campaigning to stop this war, and not just to stop the war. It wasn't just empathy for the Palestinians, although that probably started it. The idea that how could you be silent when children are being destroyed by these megaton bombs, and we're told that these bombs are given to Israel so Israel can protect its population from terrorism. Well, they saw the fraud there. But more importantly, they came to realize that the fraud is serving an interest other than their own. And this demand for divestment reflects that, the idea that behind the scene, the universities are part of the war machine. And the students came into a certain understanding that scared the hell out of the establishment. So my 2 points here, classic culture gives you an ability to see these deeper issues. And it's really, at this point, along with learning history, mastering the principles of tragedy. And here the best guide is Schiller, and Lyndon LaRouche. But this is the way that we have to build a movement, not just on a sense of empathy with people, but on this deeper sense of what it means to be human. And that's one of the most controversial of Helga's 10 principles, is the idea that man is basically good. And that's something we probably are going to have to fight with people about.
Okay, thank you, Harley. And Jacques?
Simple. Let's be in cohesion with the universe and expand our minds. The universe is creative. The universe is in accelerated expansion. Let's not stay behind and share with the others, because we are in a life or death situation and we have to organize. And to organize, we have to be beautiful souls, because beautiful souls are a joy forever. And if you think in that way and you think with this vision of the future, I think we're going to win, and to win maybe sooner than we expect.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Jacques. So I'd like to thank Karel, Sophie, Harley, and Jacques for joining me on this panel. This concludes the 2-day Schiller Institute conference, The World on the Brink for a New Treaty of Westphalia. I'll just urge all of our viewers and everyone else besides to study the conference proceedings, get them out as widely as you can, and most importantly, organize. So thank you all for joining us.